So let's go ahead and get started with how to push $3 billion more to women-owned small business set-asides. The Women-Owned Small Business Program, the SBA program, has rarely hit that 5% federal goal that the SBA sets and that other agencies adopt, but they've rarely hit that goal of 5% of the federal contracting dollars going to women-owned small businesses. And I just think this is wrong. Not only should it be met each year, but it should be exceeded. So to me, it's just crazy when it's not being met. And in today's live session, I want to talk to you about, and I want to share with you lessons learned from how we worked with the HUBZone program and the HUBZone small business owners and helped push $3 billion more to those businesses. By understanding what we did for the HUBZone program, we can see a roadmap of what could be done for women-owned small businesses so that the SBA can meet their goals, so every department can reach their goals, so every agency can meet their goals, and really inside the agencies and inside of DoD services, every command can meet their goals. There's no reason all of these organizations can't meet their goals of at least 5% going to women-owned small businesses, and that's where we want to go. I'm going to talk about what we did to make this a success in the HUBZone program, but I'll give you a little spoiler alert. I didn't blame Congress, right? When I led this effort, I didn't come along and say, hey, let's blame Congress. I took responsibility. I took responsibility for all HUBZone small businesses. And by taking responsibility, I put the HUBZone small businesses in control of their own success, of their own future. And that's what I want for women-owned small businesses. And that's the purpose of today's training, today's lesson. Okay, if you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome you to my daily federal sales training where I teach tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. When we follow a process A to Z, we're going to have repeatable, predictable results, and that's what I want for you. Do me a favor, before we get too much farther, put in the chat your company name and your core competency to help buyers remember who you are. Just use 2 or 3 words on your core competency, and that'll let us know what you do. And finally, I just want to say thank you to the GovCon Chamber of Commerce sustaining members. We don't take money from the federal government. We don't take money from large primes. It's sustaining members like you that help make this training possible, make the directories that we have on our website available to small businesses everywhere. And so we just want to say thank you for your support. Okay, so we're going to dive in. I'm going to dive in and share with you my lessons learned from helping HUBZone small businesses push $3 billion more to their small businesses. And it's something, as we go along in today's session, you can equate to how it would apply to women-owned small businesses. And so I just want to set the stage for you, right? The situation, this all happened back in 2017 and 2018 is when I started the GovCon Chamber of Commerce. I actually started it as the HUBZone Chamber of Commerce because initially that was the business I got engaged with, and that's what I started tracking. So in 2017, when I started my 5th company, I realized that the HUBZone program had never hit its goal. In 20 years, back then, 20 years, it had never hit its goal. And for the past previous 10 years, it had been shrinking, right? So performance against their 3% goal, that's all that the federal agencies had to set aside is 3% of the federal contract dollars going to HUBZone firms. And that goal had steadily been dropping, or excuse me, performance against that goal had steadily been dropping for 10 years. And in 2017, when I got on the scene, it was 1.65% is what they were hitting. Not 3%, 1.65%. And what that meant in real dollars was that $6 billion was being left on the table each year, not going to HUBZone small businesses. Theoretically, 3% would have been about $13 billion, and they were only winning $7 billion. So $6 billion was sitting on the table. And when I came along, I said, let's create a motto or a maxim, whatever you want to call it. Let's push the $6 billion off the table and into the HUBZone program, into the HUBZone small business owners' hands. Most of the set-asides, just going back to the situation as well, most of the set-asides were just not good set-asides. They were for product sales and low-value services like lawn care, et cetera. Not that we don't want lawn care businesses getting set-asides in the HUBZone program or the woman-owned small business program, but we also want cybersecurity and professional services in there. And one of the ways the government kept hitting any performance level they were hitting is they have these huge product contracts go through a HUBZone firm where some manufacturer like Dell would get most of the money, and the HUBZone will go in and they count like $1 billion sale towards the HUBZone program. And again, I don't have an interest in stopping that. What I have an interest in is helping more small businesses. In this case, when HUBZone set asides or for women-owned small businesses, help them do that. So anyways, I saw this situation, and when I saw it, I closed my 5th business and I started this thing called the HUBZone Chamber of Commerce. And I said, we're going to stop this downward slide. We're going to start pushing that money into the HUBZone program. I kind of found my passion for my my second activity, right? I spent 20 years as a small business owner with multiple businesses. And then I said, let's start this HUBZone Chamber, which eventually became the GovCon Chamber. I want you to think about similarities, though, to the Women-Owned Small Business Program. Even today, I'm describing 2017. And by the way, one quick aside, when we came on the scene, the HUBZone performance against goals shot up. And if you look at it, since we've shifted our attention away from HUBZone, it's gone down again. And so somebody needs to be having their eye on the program to be moving it forward. And for the moment, my eye is on the Women-Owned Small Business Program, not the HUBZone program. And so similarities, on the federal side, the goal is 5% for women-owned small businesses. But rarely, if ever, do they hit that goal. The women are 50% of the population or more, right? But rarely can we set aside 5% of the contract dollars for women-owned small businesses. DOD, in fact, has never hit its goal, never hit 5%. And some recent data shows them at their performance now is at the 2013 levels. This is unacceptable, right? Doesn't have to be this way. And we're going to talk about this. And so when you think about the Women-Owned Small Business Program not hitting its goals, right now, that basically represents $3 billion that should be going to women-owned small businesses. And so, here we want to sit there and push that $3 billion off that table and into women-owned small business hands like yours. So I just want to talk about why HUBZone firms weren't winning what they expected to get, why they weren't getting more set-asides. And I want us to think about that for why women-owned small businesses right now are not getting as many set-asides as I think they should, and maybe you think they should as well. So the first thing is, in no particular order, and I'm actually not going to list them all. I'm just going to give you 3 reasons on why HUBZone firms weren't getting more set-asides. And the first thing is that HUBZone firms were not attractive to contracting officers. It's just a fact. Holistically, they weren't attracted to setting aside contracts to HUBZone firms for 2 reasons that I list out here. One is the HUBZone business has to have recertification happening at a certain point, right? 1 year, 3 year, whatever it is at different points. But they have to get recertified. And so contracting officers were worried about if a HUBZone firm became decertified, no longer eligible for HUBZone, but they had awarded them a 5-year contract, then they might have to recompete that 5-year contract 2 years in, for example. And so that scared contracting officers away. And it didn't, and the problem with that is they tended to experience that more with HUBZone firms that were in the Washington, D.C. area. If they went to Oklahoma, California, where I started the HUBZone Chamber, 80% of the state is HUBZone. No one's ever going to stop becoming HUBZone until they graduate small. The second reason is that there was a false perception with contracting officers that HUBZone firms were low value skill set on what they offered, and they wanted to reach out to them on low risk. So low value contracts or low risk contracts, like I said, lawn care or product sales. Product sales are, I'll give you the money when you give me the product kind of thing. So it's very low risk to the contracting officers. But there was this false perception that HUBZone firms weren't that, let's call it sophisticated, right? That they couldn't do cybersecurity or other professional services, software development, program management, not just project management, but huge billion-dollar program management. And it's the same thing perhaps with women-owned small businesses, this perception of what women-owned small businesses can do and maybe what they can't. And what I say to people all the time is there's no such thing as a small business. There's just a billion-dollar business that's a little bit smaller, right? The Booz Allen and you are the exact same. You're subject matter experts. Just one has billions of dollars and thousands of employees, and one does not. Another reason why HUBZone firms weren't getting the set aside, and this might relate to women-owned small businesses as well, is that HUBZone firms weren't responding to sources sought. They would just say, why should I? There's no set asides. They're not going to set it aside to us. And it was this catch-22 going on between the contracting shop saying, well, why should I set it aside to HUBZone firms when they're not responding to the sources sought? And the HUBZone firms saying, well, if there's no set-asides, I'm not going to respond. And it was this catch-22 back and forth, which we began to try to address. And you'll hear about that further as I go through this. But then the last reason I want to share why HUBZone firms, and this is a huge one across the small business community, right? All 300,000 of us or whatever. A reason HUBZone firms weren't winning more set-asides is because they kept acting like competitors, not competimates. When you look at the large prime contractors, they do not act like competitors. They act like competimates. One day we're working together on this billion-dollar opportunity, and one day we're competing against it. But we're friends the whole time. We're just moving forward, so one of us is winning. And HUBZone firms were just competing, never competimating, right? Rare examples, right? But generally, people just thought, if you won, then I lose. And so I'm not working with you at all. And they wouldn't work to push opportunities to set-asides. And we got them going in that direction. I'll talk to you about how we can do that. But I see similarities with women-owned small businesses where there tends to be a little bit more competition than being competitive mates, saying, let's work together to push more set-asides. And then at the RFP, let's compete. Okay, so let me share some of the things I did within the HUBZone Chamber when I was there, and we were pushing business or opportunities to HUBZone firms. One of the biggest things that we did, and this is going into what could be done with women-owned small businesses. By the way, we did a ton. I just picked 5 to mention, but we did a ton, and I have multiple videos throughout this whole period of the successes that moved forward. I'll give you an example of something I didn't prepare to talk about, but is a really important thing. When we started the HUBZone Chamber of Commerce, I said 2 things. I want it to be virtual. I don't care about a physical event. That's not the purpose of us. And the reason I wanted it virtual was because I wanted it to be national. I wanted the HUBZone Chamber of Commerce, when I started it, to have members from every single state, from Guam to the U.S. Virgin Islands, in every single state. By the time we had 300 members, we had somebody from every single state, and Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, Northern Mariana Islands, America, Samoa. So we had everybody out there. We were not a DC-based or Oklahoma-based, but we were a national-based organization. And the reason we did that is because we wanted everybody in the HUBZone program to benefit, not just those who were close to me or knew me or something. And so we pushed really hard on that. And as we passed 1,000 and 2,000 members, that was a consistent thing for us, is that we had national presence. And so it's something that's really important because it talks about competitive, bringing people together. So a big thing that we did right from the start for moving the HUBZone program forward, which can be done for women-owned small businesses, is we put the focus on winning contracts, not on shaping policy. I didn't care about policy. I didn't care about Congress. And the reason I didn't care is because that takes years to get done. Anything to get done takes years. In the SBA, in Congress, all that activity takes years. It's necessary, but it wasn't something I was interested in doing because I wanted to do activity that would move the ball down the field in a matter of months, not years, right? And that's exactly what we did. But we did it by saying, let's look at whatever we do, whatever activity we do, it's going to be focused on winning contracts. Writing a policy is necessary, right? Somebody else can do that, but it's necessary, but it doesn't help win contracts. What helps win contracts is, for example, responding to sources sought. So the first thing we did is put the focus on winning contracts. The second thing we did is we ramped up a massive education awareness campaign. And this is something else I think women-owned small businesses should do. When I look to see what the discussion is right now around women-owned small businesses and the issues with the program, the success of the program, et cetera, I keep seeing it all going back to SBA and Congress. And I don't see it coming back to how do I win contracts? And that's where we are trying to be. And so our educational awareness campaign, the first thing is we met with hundreds of contracting officers across every agency. And we wanted to see why do you think there's not more set-asides? If you're candid enough, why aren't you setting aside to HUBZone? And that's where we learned some of those lessons. And the biggest lesson was that they're not showing up to sources sought. The second biggest lesson is when I do market research, I can't find HUBZones that do this type of work. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The second part of the awareness campaign, educational campaign, was we reached out to every single HUBZone business, every single one of them. And First, we listen to them. Excuse me. I get choked up when I'm talking about it. First, we listen to them and try to hear their complaints. What are they complaining about? What's contracting officers complaining about? Like, okay, how do we begin to turn that complaint into a problem statement, which then has a solution, right? Complaining does none of us any good, but sometimes we need to complain a little bit in order to find the problem to then define the solution. And so first we listened to the HUBZone firms. There was like 5,000 of them. So we reached out to everybody constantly. And then we educated HUBZone small businesses about the process. So many of us, me too, when I was running my businesses, wasn't totally aware of market research, how it happened, how the acquisition lifecycle worked. But we began to talk to them about the process, most particularly about the process of showing up. If you don't show up when the contracting officer is trying to decide whether to set it aside to women-owned small business, HUBZone small business, or full and open, if you don't show up, then the contracting officer can only operate with the information they have. We also had meetings with every single congressional representative. Every single one of them. I did many of them. And then we had all sorts of volunteers who were HUBZone business owners reach out to their own congressional representatives. And we educated them on the HUBZone program and government contracting. One of the things that I think government contractors just don't understand is that Congress could care less or even understand what a HUBZone or a woman-owned small business in the government contracting space is. There's 30 million small businesses in America. 300,000 of us roughly are small businesses selling to the federal government. Congress is dealing with all the craziness that they deal with, including like the war in Ukraine, funding for the entire government, all these things that are on their mind. We think about a woman-owned small business set aside. We think about HUBZone set asides. They don't. And so we have to accept that reality. And then when we do accept the reality, what we did is went and taught them in a very simple way. This is what government contracting is. And as a small business, this is why it is so important for you to see me succeed. Because when I get dollars coming from the government in a contract award, $1 million, $5 million, then I'm hiring people local. And those people are spending their money locally, which then means we need a new gas station attendant or a movie theater attendant or a pizza parlor person, haircut or whatever. And so that money is circulating locally in your district. And so we did a lot of that, teaching Congress about that. Didn't spend a ton of time. And I did talk to a few senators, but they're even worse. And then the last thing we did on the awareness or education command that I want to point out, or campaign, is we promoted winning HUBZones, right? We really went to this, went through this effort of not just celebrating HUBZones, celebrating, hey, good job, you won, but we promoted it as a way to educate contracting officers and agencies, program offices. Do you understand these women-owned small businesses, or in that case, it was HUBZone small businesses? Do you understand these small businesses have won $5 million, $20 million, $50 million contracts doing this exact high-level work, professional services like program management or legal services, IT services across the board, software development, cybersecurity. We promoted the wins of HUBZones so that contract officers and program managers could begin to look in and go, oh, I guess they can do the work. Yeah, no kidding, right? And so instead of us being mad, we just made a point of showcasing that over and over. And I would be dropping constantly this information campaign about people winning 20 million, 50 million contracts here. And they were HUBZone firms, and women-owned firms are the same way. I did a training a couple of days ago where I said there's 13 women-owned small businesses in the last 2 years who have won $50 million contracts. You know, we should be promoting that so that agency buyers can see that women-owned small businesses can certainly run a $50 million contract, no problem. Okay, so that's education and awareness. The next thing we did as we move forward is we promoted DSBS to every single HUBZone. If you've been to any one of my trainings, I'm talking about visibility, be visible where the buyer looks. And the number one market research tool in the federal government for buyers is the Dynamic Small Business Search, or DSBS tool that SBA runs. Together with SAM, it makes up your small business profile. And when a buyer is looking for a HUBZone firm or a woman-owned small business, they look in there and let's say they type woman-owned small business cybersecurity. If they don't have any coming back or very few coming back, they say, women can't do it. Let's move on. HUBZone firms can't do it. And the HUBZone, when we did the HUBZone activity back in 2018, 70 or 80% of HUBZone businesses were completely invisible. They had no keywords, nothing in there that allowed the buyer to find them, but they had past performance, right? And so we taught them to do that and to fill it out. And buyers were able to begin to find them more during market research. invite many more HUBZones to come in and respond to sources sought. And for women-owned small businesses, it's the same thing. If you watch previous training, I talk about the stats of how invisible women-owned small businesses are right now in 2023. And that's some simple step that we could take that moves forward. So that was huge because we had tons of HUBZone firms filling out their dynamic small business profile. I was doing it 200, 300 at a time, where I would go out and my team and I would do reports for people, these gap analysis. By the way, you can go to govconchamber.com/WOSB if you're a woman-owned small business and request I do something like this, a visibility gap analysis. How visible are you to the federal buyer right now? Anyways, that was a big thing that we did. And we did that. We reached out to every HUBZone firm to do that. The next thing we did, second to last thing here, and huge effort on our part, was we ran these things called set-aside calls. We did over 400 set-aside calls. In fact, they're still going. I transfer that responsibility to somebody else, but they're still going on. HUBZone set-aside calls. And these set-aside calls were 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes sometimes. And they were designed to pick an opportunity that was in this market research phase, and that HUBZone firms wanted to push, or I thought more often than not that we could push to HUBZone if we just got enough HUBZone firms to respond. And so we would find the opportunity, invite a ton of HUBZone firms. We never had favorites. We invited as many as we could find that were in that particular area. Construction, IT, training, it didn't matter because we rotated it every day to a different opportunity. What we were trying to do is to just increase the number of sources sought so that HUBZone firms could win. But these meetings were designed to sit there and quickly answer some questions about the opportunity, give people guidance on how they can push it to HUBZone set aside. And the other thing was to share information we learned from the contracting officers, because we would reach out and quickly ask some questions. In particular, are you open to this being set aside to HUBZone if enough interested parties respond, right? When we got the go ahead, we ran these set aside calls. And so we did this every single day, and we got to this point where we were doing 2 a days, which was crazy and awesome and very successful. And let me give you a quick example of my favorite, because it was obviously the big one, but it's my favorite because it's exactly what I was trying to prove, is that if the buyer and sellers can get together, then there can be a match. So there was a State Department reached out to me one day when we were doing this, and they said, hey, we've been trying to reach HUBZones. We wanted this opportunity to be considered to be set aside for HUBZone, but we can't really get any kind of response or traction from HUBZone firms. Can you help us? They reached out to me through the SBA. So they reached out to the SBA first. The SBA knew who I was, and they were trying stuff. They said, well, let's go ask Neil. And when they reached me, they said, this needs to be done tomorrow. Can you help us reach out? And the first thing I said was no. I'm like, what? I was like, look, you're asking HUBZone firms to respond with a 10-page response in 24 hours. That's unfair to them. Now, if you're open to just a single-page template, then we can do this. A template that says, here's my core capabilities and here's my past performance. That's what they really wanted. Can you do it, and have you done it? And the contracting officer was awesome. He's like, no, that's perfect. We're just trying to see if we're doing sources sought here. And so I said, okay, I'll help. Within 24 hours, the State Department had back almost 100 responses from HUBZone firms who said they could do the work and they were going to respond to the RFP when it dropped. They wanted it to be set aside. Long story short, State Department set it aside to HUBZone. It was a $200 million opportunity. It ended up getting awarded, I think, to 4 different companies, right? So $200 million that would have gone full and open or some other set aside went to HUBZones only because they responded, right? Yes, I'm so great because I got them to respond, but they would not have set it aside to HUBZone if the responses were not quality responses from quality companies. All I did was get the HUBZone firms to show up into the sources sought, and the government set it aside. This happened over and over again, not at the $200 million level, right? But many times in the below $5 million level, and often over the $5 million level to like the $25 million level. That's all normal promotion out there. And this was because we just taught people the process of getting the set-asides means more people showing up, not just you and 3 of your friends, but 20 of your friends showing up. The most important thing that we did, as I'm kind of wrapping here a little bit, the most important thing that I think I did for the overall success of the HUBZone program to move as it did, the way we moved it, and that I think women-owned small businesses can see similar success, is we helped HUBZone firms take responsibility, not blame. Don't blame the government. Don't put the responsibility on the government, but we took responsibility ourselves. And when we took responsibility, we gave ourselves control. By taking responsibility, the HUBZone firms gained control. They realized that there was no conspiracy by the contracting officers. If they showed up en masse, right, 10, 20 responders to an RFI sources saw it, then the likelihood of it being set aside to HUBZone, or in this case, women-owned small business, is very likely. And so that was a big deal, but it wasn't until we took responsibility. There's a line out there that I love, and it basically goes, if you want to see the change, be the change. If you want to see the change to the women-owned small business program, be the change. Right now, I'm looking for 40 women-owned small business owners who want to push $3 billion more to women-owned small business set-aside, not for yourself, but for all women-owned small businesses. If you're interested in helping me raise the tide, if you're willing to help raise the tide for all small businesses, do me a favor, reach out. If I can find 40 women-owned small business owners who are interested in moving the tide, raising the tide for all women-owned small businesses, then I'll get overly engaged in this with you. And so send me a message in LinkedIn or in email. And I just want to remind everybody, government contracting, it is not a secret. It is just a process. I'll see you in the next training.